Her name was Naomi. And the first time she walked into that gallery, it felt like the artwork turned toward her, like the room adjusted itself to her presence. Not loud, not demanding, just undeniable. She was the curator of the exhibit, confident, graceful, deeply rooted in herself. The kind of woman who didn't need to prove she belonged, because her very being did that for her. The room buzzed with quiet conversations, clinking glasses, and curated elegance. It was the kind of space where people spoke softly, but judged loudly. And that's where she saw him. Oliver. Tall, composed, slightly rumpled in that way that only the very wealthy manage to make look effortless. He wasn't surrounded by people. He stood alone, staring at a painting like it had just spoken to him. Then he looked at her, and she knew. He'd heard the same thing. Their first conversation wasn't remarkable in words, but in rhythm. Their pauses lined up. Their thoughts circled the same questions. There was no spark. It was quieter than that, like two puzzle pieces clicking into place. They started seeing each other, slowly at first, cautiously. He invited her to a dinner party that was more gallery than meal. She took him to a small poetry night in a basement bar in Brooklyn, where he sat on a broken stool and smiled the entire time. They were from different worlds, but something in the silence between them felt familiar. When he told her about his family, he did it with a sheepish grin. Old, money, too much tradition, private schools, Ivy League, legacy everything. He talked about it like someone reciting the plot of a play he never auditioned for. Naomi shared her world, too, her mother's strength, her own hustle, the way she learned to occupy space, not just pass through it. She wasn't looking for fairy tales, but Oliver wasn't a fantasy. He was real, and that made him dangerous in the best way. 7 months later, he proposed in Central Park. It wasn't extravagant. No photographers, no violinists, just him and her and a city that paused around them for a single breath. She said yes. She said yes because she believed in what they had, believed it could stretch to fit all the versions of themselves. The first time she saw his family's estate, it was dusk. The house looked like it had been carved out of history, stone and glass, softened by years of wealth, everything beautiful, everything quiet, too quiet. She took his hand as they stood at the gates. "I'm just nervous," she whispered. "They're gonna love you." He smiled. But something in her chest tightened. Just a little. Like her body knew something her heart wasn't ready to hear. The dining room was flawless. Long table, soft candlelight, crystal glasses that barely made a sound when touched. Everything looked like it belonged on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Curated, elegant, perfectly composed. Naomi sat straight, hands folded in her lap, smiling just enough. She wasn't nervous. She was aware. The eyes on her weren't hostile, just measured. Oliver's mother smiled politely, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. It hovered somewhere between curiosity and calculation. "You have such an interesting hairstyle," she said, tilting her head ever so slightly. "It's natural," Naomi replied, keeping her tone even. "Oh, how bold," came the answer, wrapped in silk and subtle judgment. The conversation moved on. Property taxes, art auctions, private schools. Every time Naomi tried to enter the flow, it twisted away from her, like water avoiding contact. One of the guests across the table gave her a look that lasted a second too long. "You have one of those faces," he said with a smirk. "You ever done any modeling?" She smiled, not the warm kind, the polite kind, number just living in it. Oliver laughed softly beside her, completely at ease. He didn't see it. He didn't feel the weight of the microcuts, tiny, precise incisions masked as compliments. Later that night, she mentioned it gently. That dinner was a lot. He kissed her forehead, murmured, "They're just being themselves. It takes them time to warm up." And that was that. The next morning, Oliver's mother invited Naomi for tea in one of the smaller sitting rooms, the kind of room with hand-painted teacups and furniture no one actually used. The air was cool, the window slightly open, the table set with practiced grace. "You probably come from a more expressive family," she said, pouring tea with perfect control. "We're a little more formal here. It's not personal, just how we are." Naomi stirred her tea in silence. She didn't need to reply. The message was clear. Tone it down, smooth the edges, don't make waves. As she left the room, she felt it again, the tightening in her chest. Not fear, not sadness, recognition. This wasn't resistance, it was soft exclusion, a velvet rope between her and the family she had married into. They hadn't said anything wrong. Not really. That was the part that made it hard to explain, even to herself. But a part of her already knew. You don't have to scream to be silenced. There were no fights, no raised voices, no cruel words, just silence, carefully folded between each interaction, each polite smile, each event Naomi wasn't invited to until it was already over. The family had a way of moving like a closed circle, one Naomi was allowed to orbit, but never quite enter. There was a dinner once, a formal one. Dozens of guests, polished silverware, staff in black and white moving like clockwork. Naomi found out about it 2 hours before it started, when she passed the dining room and saw the preparations. "We thought it might be a bit formal for you," Oliver's mother had said, glancing up from a seating chart. Not unkind, not apologetic. Just finished. Naomi stayed upstairs that night. From the window, she watched the guests arrive in shining cars. Laughter drifted up toward her, muffled and distant. She saw them take the family photo in the garden. Oliver, his parents, his sister, a few others. She wasn't asked to join. No one even came to check if she was coming down. Later, she heard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Oliver's father, speaking low to a guest over brandy in the study. He had other options, you know. Very promising young women, but, well, love makes men impulsive. "And the family?" the guest asked. "We're adjusting," came the answer. Calm, steady, like a man learning to tolerate an inconvenient truth. Naomi stood in the hallway, just beyond their sight, her breath held like something fragile. She didn't cry. There was no point. In the weeks that followed, her ideas were dismissed with smiles. She offered suggestions for a charity initiative. Something fresh, something meaningful. The committee nodded and then moved on without her. One day, she suggested featuring a young black sculptor in the gallery space connected to the family's foundation. Oliver's mother glanced up briefly and said, "That's certainly a unique perspective, but we're aiming for a more timeless look. Something that aligns with the family tone." And just like that, her voice dissolved into the room. She wasn't unwanted. Not exactly. But she wasn't included either. And somehow, that felt worse. It wasn't rejection. It was erasure. Polite. Beautiful. Silent. And Oliver? He still smiled at her across the table, still held her hand at night, still said, "I'm so glad you're part of this." But she had started to wonder, was she part of this? Or just placed beside it, carefully, quietly, and without asking too many questions? The answer wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. She was living it, every day. She started waking up earlier, not because she had things to do, but because sleep had become a stranger. The bed felt too large, the room too quiet. The silence no longer comforted her. It pressed down like weight on her chest. She would sit by the window in the early hours, watching the sky shift from black to blue, and wonder how she had ended up here, in a life that looked perfect from the outside but hollowed her out from within. At first, she tried harder, softer voice, smoother clothes, holding back her laughter, offering up compromise after compromise like small sacrifices at an altar that never gave anything back. Oliver noticed something had changed. He asked once if everything was all right. She said yes, because she was tired, too tired to explain what he still didn't see. He loved her. She believed that. But love without awareness is like water in a broken cup. It spills out without reaching the roots. She watched him at dinner, laughing with his mother, discussing investment portfolios and private equity. He was warm, charming, effortless, and completely blind to the space growing between them. She had become background, a polite presence, an accessory to a life she no longer felt part of. Sometimes she thought back to her mother, the way she carried herself, the way she once told Naomi, "If a room can't hold your voice, it doesn't deserve your silence either." That voice, the one that used to speak clearly and firmly, now lived in whispers. The final moment came not with a fight, but with a phrase. They were sitting at the edge of the bed one night, their backs to each other. She said very quietly, "I don't know who I am in this house anymore." He didn't reply right away. Then finally, "Maybe you're just overwhelmed." That word, just, broke something open. She realized he would never understand. Not because he didn't care, but because caring wasn't the same as knowing how to see. That night, she didn't sleep. She folded her clothes slowly, laid her favorite earrings beside her toothbrush, sat in the bathroom with the lights off, listening to her own breathing until dawn. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was finished. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Not a scream, not a slammed door, just a quiet decision. I will not disappear here. The morning felt the same. That was the strange part. The same filtered light through pale curtains, the same soft sound of cutlery downstairs, the same scent of fresh coffee wafting up from the kitchen. But inside her, everything had already changed. Naomi moved calmly, deliberately. She dressed in silence, choosing the clothes that made her feel most like herself, not the ones that matched the house or the family or the image. Just her. She packed lightly, only what mattered. A few books, a necklace from her mother, a journal, the things that still held her name, untouched. On the bedside table she left her wedding ring. Not with drama, not with rage, just gently. She wrote a short note, folded it once, left it where he'd find it. The handwriting was steady. There were no accusations, just truth. When Oliver entered the room minutes later, she was gone. The air felt thinner, as if the room had noticed, as if the house had finally realized someone real had been there, and let her slip away. He picked up the note and read it. I gave this everything, but I won't stay where I'm slowly becoming no one. I love you, but I won't lose me for it. He sat on the edge of the bed, the paper shaking slightly in his hand. The silence around him now felt different. It wasn't elegant. It was empty. Downstairs, the day went on. Plans were being made, calls taken. The family's rhythm never skipped a beat. But Naomi was already walking, blocks away, into a city that didn't know her name but didn't need to. She didn't cry. Her face was still, her pace steady. There was no destination, just direction. Forward. The streets were loud again. Voices, car horns, music from an open window, the kind of noise that reminded her she was alive. She looked up at the sky, pale blue, wide open, And for the first time in months, she took a deep breath, without feeling like she had to apologize for existing. Some endings aren't loud. Sometimes freedom sounds like your own footsteps walking away. If this story moved something in you, let it sit with you a while. Then share it. Subscribe if you want to hear more voices that don't always get heard. Because being seen, truly seen, shouldn't be rare.